Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the blue zones. These were popularized by an author named Dan Buettner. They were presented as a plant-based way of living and a great way to reach 100 years old. And yes, alcohol was involved. The blue zones concept has been used as a reference to what a healthy lifestyle should be, again, to live to 100 and more. But how strong is the evidence? Is that the lifestyle for longevity? And if it is it the only one? Are these people really living longer? We discussed that with Gil Carvalho. The Q&A today is abbreviated, but I'll be answering questions in the chat if Dr. JV will let me. Enjoy. Talk about the blue zones. Our guest today is Dr. Gil Carvalho. Dr. Carvalho has his own channel. It's called Nutrition Made Simple. For those of you who are looking things up, you don't have to. We can tell you. There are significant differences in our approach. We focus more on low carb, no matter how you can do it. Dr. Carvalho is a little bit more plant-based. And we have some differences in terms of LDL and how you manage cholesterol. But we may touch on some of those as we get into the discussion. The real focus today, though, is to see what all three of us can bring up regarding the blue zones. The blue zones were, gosh, I remember reading that book the first time, what was it, 30 years ago, at least, maybe 20 years ago. A fellow named Dan Buettner decided he wanted to go take a look. I think Dan Buettner's interest originally came from two interests. One was travel, and the other was lifestyle and health. So he started looking at this, wrote a book, saw a few places in the world where he thought, people seem to be healthy here. And he went back and at the end of the day, got a lot of resonation. It resonated with a lot of people. He focused on several things. He focused on diet, as any health influencer does. He focused on natural foods. In fact, it reminds me of a comment Jesus and I were talking about before the show, where there was a person saying, well, what was it? It was one of the blue zone groups was eating a lot of carbs. Jesus, do you remember which one that was? What that comment was?
I don't remember what the comment was, Dr. Brewer.
Jesus,
Okinawa, traditionally Okinawa is like probably 80% carbohydrate.
Anyhow, a lot of carbs, and it was like, okay, we get that, we understand. But even Okinawa, which is one of the higher carb intake blue zones, the one in Japan, I don't think they're getting up and eating 2 or 3 bowls full of the Kelsey Mix cereals for breakfast every day. There's also social things too, like having a support structure. Vivek Murthy, the current, I believe he's the current Surgeon General of the U.S., has written a book focused on loneliness and health. And sure enough, if you don't have a good social structure, especially as you age, your health is in peril. There's some other mental health related things too, especially when you get, again, back to Japan and Okinawa's, the blue zone in Japan. There's a focus on ikigai. That's a Japanese word for purpose in life. So I don't know. Hey, Jesus, are you sitting over there thinking I've already given away the whole show?
Well, so some people want that, but the whole purpose here is to have a discussion about how, well, first, what's the evidence behind the blue zones claims from Dan's book? And I have another couple of names of people who have a different opinion. And we wanted to bring Dr. Gil Carvalho as well, because you covered that on a video recently when the Netflix documentary came out. And I think on that video, you point out some really interesting things that we believe it's important for the audience to know about. So I don't know if you want to start with that, Dr. Gil.
Sure. I mean, in general, I think the blue zones approach is interesting. It's a type of evidence that falls under the umbrella of ecological associations. So basically looking at a country somewhere or a tribe somewhere, the population of an island, and then trying to look for a correlation between some aspect of their lifestyle or some aspect of their lives and some health outcome. And the bottom line for me is that ecological associations are interesting. They're good kind of clues. They ask good questions. They're good at raising question marks, but they're not a demonstration of cause and effect. So we normally use to use the nerdy term, we call it hypothesis generating, when something can raise an idea for us to ask in tighter experiments or scientific studies. Kind of like an anecdote, for example, a lot of people reporting some anecdote. Yeah, you can raise questions in your mind, but you don't assume cause and effect until you have tighter scientific data. And ecological associations are kind of like that as well. And we can talk about why, the shortcomings. But that's my general view of this type of data. Blue zones, you'll hear different ecological associations being brought up online on social media. It's very common. Some people point to the Maasai or the Inuits or the French paradox. Like, these things are very popular, but I think they are interesting, curious things to look at, not demonstrations of cause and effect.
Well, Jesus, I don't know if you want to react to that, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on both of those topics. The first one is the ecological studies. There's speaking of debates, there's a major focus that people have on seed oils. And we had Chris Kenobi on the show, and Chris Kenobi walked through a litany of evidence. Unfortunately, every one of those studies was environmental epidemiology. And so I'm sure there will be people that will hate on me for saying it, but I still have major concern regarding that evidence regarding seed oils. And you're right. There's a lot of with any health concept or any kind of concept, if the evidence is totally dependent on, you see this in the environment or the ecology, and you see that happening, it's a challenge to make that connection on an individual basis.
So let me start addressing the elephant in the room, Dr. Burr, because it's a little bit distracting before we move on to more the conversation on statistics and data. Yeah, you're doing it already. Why? How come did you look like you were from 1985 or traveling back in time with that shirt?
I didn't know it was that bad. So we set up a green screen because we need to have a little bit more flexibility with the background. And and we're using two different cameras. On one of the cameras, the background is far worse. Basically, what it's doing is taking the green and adding a little shimmer to the rest of me instead of just changing the background.
Well, you can play with it a little bit, go back and forth, just for people to know that. And now let's go back to the main topic. So for those who are not familiar with the blue zones, we mentioned that a little bit. So they come from the book of Daniel Butner, and they are calling 5 cities on Earth as the places where most people over 100 are actually living in. Loma Linda, California, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, and Okinawa in Japan. So the first question that comes to my mind, and that I have seen on some of the comments and I would like you to tackle on, is how strong is the evidence that actually proves, or to how strong is the evidence to actually say that in those places actually is where most centenarians of people over 100 actually live? Is that a correct assumption to begin with?
Before you answer, Gil, let me just throw in an item. I thought that most of the original blue zone studies or information was based on number of centenarians.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
it?
and healthy centenarians, I believe, also.
Yeah. So, and those, no matter how many you're going to have, well, I mean, we were talking about it earlier this morning, Jesus, where Japan was just like way out in front with 15 per 10,000. So we're not talking about the majority or anywhere near a significant portion of the population in this area.
Yeah, no, I agree with the points you guys are bringing up. So in terms of the percentage, I think I made this point in my video that looking at centenarians, I'm not sure if it's the best metric of health of a population, precisely because it's so unusual. Even in the blue zones, there are some estimates. It's like in Sardinia, I think they estimated 0.5% of the population reach the age of 100. Now that's great compared to the average in many other places, but it's obviously a very small percentage of people that get there. So they're outliers. Centenarians are, even in these hotspots. So I completely agree that I have this reservation as well, that maybe looking at average life expectancy of a country or a region might be a better metric of general health, because with centenarians we're always looking at genetic freaks, right, in the good sense, and people who just make it. It could even be that they have such good genetics that they just are able to withstand more than the majority of people, even if the lifestyle isn't perfect. Although there's a counter argument to that as well, because when you change the conditions around them, these zones can cease to be blue zones, and there's an argument for that for Okinawa, that it no longer is a blue zone because culture has changed. But yeah, I think that reservation, I definitely share it.
So what is your overall position? Yes, no, true, false. If you were to force your position into a binary, what would it be?
I think that many of the features that he points to are important features of health, not because of the blue zones, but because of reams of data that we have that are more reliable than ecological associations. Like, for example, the physical activity, staying physically active, healthy diet, several features of healthy diet that he points to, and probably even aspects of social connection. So I think those are key to health. Now, are those going to guarantee that someone makes it to 100? No. I mean, there's plenty of people who live healthy lives that are not going to make anywhere near to 100. I think the best way to make sure you get to 100 is to choose the right parents, and everything else is kind of a detail. So I think, I think the things that he points to make sense, but I'm not convinced that they are the causal factors necessarily. And we could talk about why I have reservations about those being causal, or at least being sufficient to make someone become a centenarian.
Jesus, Dr. JV, any comments, questions?
Well, I couldn't agree more, and that's the problem that I have whenever somebody brings out the blue zones as proof of what you should do to be healthy. Because if you ask any centenarian, any person who live up to 100, even though Dan's book says only 25% of longevity is kind of driven by genetics, it's important. I mean, and there's a bunch of studies who show how are your telomeres on your DNA, and how all those other characteristics on the DNA that can be driving how long you're going to live. And then it's the lifestyle that you do, which probably that's what they're making reference to. If you live a healthy lifestyle, if you have bad genes, you're not going to make it as far as you probably could have done it. But it also comes to the point of, even Dan on the book says, Okinawa is transforming on a whole different city, just because of all these processed foods are coming on board, and people are starting to eat more like a westernized way of eating. And I couldn't agree more with Dr. Gil on that one. For me, eating a healthy lifestyle has to do with your own genetic makeup, and then do as best as you can to improve your health. And you see it every day. I mean, I can give you my own perspective. I'm 33 years old. My wife is 32, just made it to 32. And we can drink the same lemonade, if you want to do that as an example, the same source of carbs. My blood sugar is going to go up to 180, 200. And hers is not going to do that, even with the same factor. So there is a bunch of other stuff to consider before saying, hey, if you live like the guys who are in Okinawa, you're going to live to 100. That's a stretch. How many people are living in Okinawa dying still from heart attacks and strokes? So that's just kind of to point out Dr. Gil's perspective.
Yeah, just to add to that, one thing that to me is one of the hardest things to wrap our heads around, when he points to these specific keys. So he boils down to 4 keys, right? It's the movement or physical activity. It's the diet. It's the outlook. So religion or some kind of purpose, and then it's the connection with the society or family. But to me, these seem like very common characteristics of small places like villages and rural environments. Almost by default, if you look at small places like that outside of big cities, and if you go back a generation or two, this would be essentially how most people live. They didn't eat a ton of junk food because it wasn't available as ubiquitously as it is now. They ate a lot more natural foods that they grew in their own yard or got from the neighbor. There was a lot more of these. Families kept a lot closer because people traveled less far away. So a lot of these, and religion was more of a factor. So a lot of these factors that he points to seem to me are very common, and especially, a generation ago or 2 generations ago would be even more common. And yet thousands and thousands of those places, of those rural communities and villages throughout the world are not hotspots of centenarians. So there's got to be something else going on there. Either the genetics are a facilitator or enable you to get there once there are certain environmental aspects in place, or there are other environmental characteristics to the blue zones that are helping them. And we can touch on some of those theories, but yeah, it seems to me that although most of his keys are good health advice in general, to suggest that somebody is going to become a centenarian by following those is pretty optimistic.
That sounds like a gentle misnomer.
Yeah, most people will almost certainly not be centenarians, even if they live super clean. But yeah, I guess you can maximize your potential by doing all the right things, by playing your cards right. You can maximize whatever potential, whatever fuel you have in the tank naturally. You can make that, you can get the most out of it, but how far you get is going to depend on your genetics as well. I think that's obvious.
Yeah. It's interesting in terms of our progression of our opinions. Jesus was trying to push me into an opinion this morning, and as I often do, I was refusing. But as we continue this conversation and I continue to look at it, I think I do have a clearer opinion, and that is in terms of lifestyle advice. Yeah, it's good lifestyle advice. In terms of this contributing to the science, I just don't think it does.
Well, you were pushing on Dr. Gil to tell you a yes or no option, and you're always answering it depends. So it's easier for you to ask it, but not to answer it, right?
That's okay.
Oh man, that does that all the time. He does that all the time, Gil.
Well, everybody's better at forming an opinion than I am. I just I cannot form an opinion to save my life.
Well,
I think they're good departure points, right? The ecological associations are good departure points. But once we already have a lot of cohort studies and a lot of randomized trials, which are much more rigorous, then I agree it adds relatively little. Like you could argue, okay, this is a whole place where we observe this in the natural environment. With cohort studies, you're going to have that as well. I agree. It adds relatively little to the whole equation once we already have, hundreds or thousands and thousands of studies that are more robust.
Yep. Going back to part of the strategies, you mentioned social support. You mentioned some of the purpose. One of the things that when you read the book, it's very heavy on the diet side, on how is this people actually eating that it can promote longevity. And it kind of seems like, unless I misunderstood, it kind of seems like they give a lot of weight to the diet, even more than genetics, just the diet, and physical activity. By hearing some of the conversation, you hear a lot about plant-based, a lot of vegetables on the diet. You hear a lot of fermented foods, especially in Japan. There's a lot of spices mentioned in there, like turmeric or ginger. And then you have the other side, people on YouTube mentioning, well, I have been in those places, and these people eat a lot of lean meats, fish, even they cook all of that in lard. What's your take on that? What do you think is the role of diet in these places, or the diet in anybody who lives up to 100?
So those are pretty different questions. The first question is, what role is the diet playing in those places? I think there's a lot of uncertainty, both because there's uncertainty about the exact diets. At least I don't know. I've been to one of those places, so I can't give you a confident account of what they're eating. But so we have these indirect accounts. We have Dan Buettner, who went there and describes, and then we have other indirect accounts. And as we already talked about, even if I knew exactly what they were eating, I would not make the leap of cause and effect. I don't know, because there's so many variables. There's the diet, there's the exercise, there's the environment, there's the climate, there's the genetic. I mean, there's so many things, cultural and at all levels, that I would not say the diet is having this effect in the blue zones. The second question you asked me, what effect does diet have in health and probably longevity? I think we have evidence that it probably plays a major factor. When you're asking in terms of lifespan, it's always a little harder, because those are really tough metrics, really, really tough outcomes to measure. But there's some data. There's data, both cohort studies and then genetic studies, looking at correlates. What are the genetic markers that determine longevity? And they are things, many of them, that we can affect through diet. So things like alcohol intake, for example, body weight, ApoB. There are others, but these are glucose level. These are things that we consistently see impacting health and risk of death. And we know that diet has a powerful effect on those metrics. So I think we have substantial evidence to suggest that diet will have a powerful impact on how long someone lives. Whether you make it to 100 or not, that's a different story, but it will determine your how you fare in general.
Definitely. And what about, this is a point where Dr. Brewer and I have probably a little bit of a different perspective, and maybe not, because we're all about, if you have insulin resistance problems, pre-diabetes or diabetes, you don't know it, look for it, make sure that you don't have it. And if you do, be careful about the type of carbohydrates that you eat on a daily basis. So can you give us your 2 cents on what's your perspective on the role of carbohydrates on a healthy diet? And if somebody was to decide, okay, I'm seeing a bunch of diets out there. I'm seeing that there is carnivore, that there's plant-based, that there's Mediterranean, that there is low carb, that there's keto diet, there's paleo, and all these other trends. What's the best diet that works for me if I'm worried about carbohydrates?
So first of all, the way you phrased it, be careful about the type of carbohydrates that you eat, I think is phenomenal advice for anyone. And that's, in a nutshell, how I look at carbohydrate. Be mindful of the type of carbohydrate that you eat. I don't avoid carbohydrate in my diet. I don't avoid fat in my diet, but I do pay close attention to the type of carbohydrates and the type of fats. So to me, it's less about the quantity of these macronutrients, and it's more about the quality. And I think most viewers know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about refined carbohydrates, whether it's Pop-Tarts or soda or whatever, all these ultra processed, highly refined carbohydrates. not great choices. And then whole carbohydrates, like fruit or like whole grains or like legumes, for most people, and let's say people who are metabolically, their glucose metabolism works fine. I don't avoid those foods in my diet. Now, do I think that there's a room for personalization? For example, somebody has type 2 diabetes. Can it be a reasonable strategy to moderate high glycemic carbohydrates or high glycemic foods and replace with other things? Yeah, I think that makes sense. It could be part of a sensible strategy. I don't think that we need to tell everyone to be scared of carbs. I don't think carbophobia or lipophobia help, but understanding the difference between types of carbs and then how it can be personalized for individual circumstances, I think that's very important and reasonable.
That sounds like a point for Dr. Brewer and his "it depends" answer to everything. Right?
I knew Jesus was going to try to draw me back into that.
Well, I don't know what you're doing back there.
I'm just listening.
Oh, man. Okay, do you have an opinion on that, Dr. Brewer? The role of diet, the role of carbohydrates for a long, healthy life?
I do. You know, some of it's personal, Gil. I am, as I've aged, when I was in my early 60s, I first found out that I was significantly insulin resistant. And I also first found some plaque in my arteries. And because it was getting so personal, I studied a lot more at that point in time. And then began to find out that most of us have significant insulin resistance. And I agree. If it's not, I agree with part of your, I think what I'm hearing from you, and that is, if it's not a problem for you, then it's probably not a problem. And I would also agree clearly, no matter what we're talking about, that there's a major difference in carbs. You've got very glycemic carbs, as you mentioned, like Pop-Tarts and sugar sweetened drinks. Then you've got, and cereals and high ultra processed grain products. And then you've got other carbs like, you know, sweet potato always gets listed as a healthy carb. And then you've got a very inert group of carbs in terms of your blood sugar, the fibers, cauliflower, broccoli, etc. But I think the biggest challenge is that there's a lot more insulin resistance out there than any of us have recognized in the past.
I agree with that, especially if we're talking about US or kind of Western hemisphere in general, that it's a problem. Just to touch on that briefly, I'm going to try not to be too long, but with respect to insulin resistance, the evidence that I've seen is that carbohydrate, in terms of preventing insulin resistance, let's start there. That carbohydrate doesn't have much of an impact. You can there's all kinds of studies looking at low carb versus low fat diets, and as long as you maintain a healthy body weight, and even starting with people with insulin resistance, I've seen trials with all kinds of diet breakdowns, higher carb, higher fat, lower carb. And as long as you have weight loss, you consistently see improvements in insulin resistance. So based on the data that I've seen, I'm not worried about carbohydrate for me, particularly, and for people who don't have that issue. In terms of somebody who already has, for example, type 2 diabetes, you can put diabetes in remission on all of these diets as well. And we have trials showing all that. You can take someone who's diabetic, give them a low carb diet, put diabetes in remission, and give them a high carb diet, put diabetes in remission, as long as the critical factor seems to be losing enough adipose mass. There are some nuances, but we're talking about general broad strokes. So that, I think, is important. And then there's a more nuanced argument to be made about, okay, if you're giving someone with type 2 diabetes a very glycemic diet, are you causing harm in that interim before they achieve remission, because you're causing these excessive glycemic spikes? There's an argument there. I think it's an interesting debate. But in general, I think with any of these diets, as long as they're mostly whole foods, and and depends on personal preference as well. I have viewers, for example, who went on a low-fat, very high-carb diet. They put their diabetes in remission, and they stayed there for years. And I have many viewers who are the exact opposite, went on low-carb diets and achieved similar metabolic results. And both of these people are doing really, really well. And often the same person says, well, I tried the other diet and it was a complete flop for me. So there's an element there of personal preference and what people are able to maintain and sustain long-term. And I think that's crucial. But I don't see a universal concern with all carbs for causing diabetes or causing insulin resistance.
So, Dr. JV, we seem to have gotten from blue zones into low carb. I still have, I actually am biting my tongue because I have a reaction I'd like to make, but I'm waiting for you.
Well, just don't forget it, because you tend to use that. You tend to just say, I'm going to say something, and then you forget. But I think we agree, because you both said glycemic carbs, and that's the key. It's not just any carbs. And we are all saying just be aware of, avoid processed foods and refined carbs, which is probably the worst thing you can put in your body. It's the tastiest, it's the most flavored, and that's the purpose, to keep you addicted to all that stuff, all that junk food. But whenever somebody says junk food, we think about hot dogs, hamburgers, sausages, and the process of those can be tricky as well. But we're also talking about the cakes and the cookies and the processed cereals. That's the whole point. And I think we're basically saying the same thing. One thing that I agree on the blue zones part is they're saying most of these people are trying to eat a low-calorie food that is very nutrient dense. And if you are into the standard American diet, you're doing exactly the opposite. You're having a lot of calories with very, very few nutrients. And that's the whole point. Regardless of the macronutrients, if those are full on nutrients, they're nutrient dense, not so much calories, and they're not spiking your blood sugar over time. They're not keeping your blood sugar about 120, 140 on a daily basis continuously. Then you're safe. If you're trying to get some good results by eating the Pop-Tarts every day and having that for breakfast, that's not going to work. And that's part of the blue zones lessons as well. Even if we don't agree with the science behind the blue zones entirely, there are some good lessons. Like, you want to live longer, your job is to do a healthy lifestyle every single day, and that's the hardest part.
Just to reinforce that, because I think maybe this will be construed as we've been bashing blue zone for half an hour. To put a positive note on it. Yeah, I don't think ecological associations are the strongest type of evidence, but the positive here is that whether we like it or not, the blue zones are very captivating and very inspiring for people. And we can see that. People, you show them bar graphs or randomized trials, it doesn't really connect, but you show them a show about the blue zones with these charming centenarians, and people are charmed by this and they are inspired. And if this type of content inspires people to focus on the essentials, I think this is what the blue zones get right. It focuses on the essentials. It focuses on the lifestyle factors, staying physically active, eating a diet that's healthy, that's devoid of ultra-processed foods, all these things that we already know work, but we have a hard time getting people to do them and are considered boring advice. But when you present it in this format of the blue zones, of these exotic places with these really endearing characters, these centenarians that are great people, it's very captivating. And so if that's achieved by the blue zone story and the content, I don't want to discourage people from implementing those changes in their lives. That's brilliant.
Move to a beach if necessary.
Sure, yeah.
So are either of you guys familiar with the term bon mot, B-O-N-M-O-T?
No, that sounds like
it's a good word in French, but
yeah. Oh, that's right. So you speak French?
Depends who you ask.
So I'm really pulling that out of the literary community. The literary community talks about, there's hard-hitting books, but then there's a bon mot. And a bon mot is like a sweet taste. It's like a dessert. It's very
Mhm.
easy to eat and fun to eat. And I would agree. I think that's why, I mean, that's what National Geographic is as well. They're not hard hitting science. They're a bon mot. It's easy to digest. It's something that your everyday person can look at and identify with. And I would agree also that he's hitting some of the key things that we want to hit in terms of a good lifestyle. Core belief systems. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. If people think that the mental health stuff is soft science, it's not. There's very good science about that. Unfortunately, most of our audience does not get into it, but I remember we've done a series on purpose and having a good purpose and the impact on your lifespan. There's great information that came out of analytics of the U.S. Census that looked at the people's objective scores of having a sense of purpose in life, and going back and following them a few years later. This is not environmental data. It's one-on-one data, and it was very predictive of their lifespan. You look at things like the Holocaust survivor study. Basically, they found matched case controls, and they looked at Holocaust survivors versus a matched case control that did not get put in the concentration camp. Even though the guys that spent time in the concentration camp were sicker, they had more high blood pressure, more heart disease, more diabetes, more cancers, they were outliving their matched control, their counterparts. So there is really good evidence that purpose, mental health is very, very important. Vivek Murthy talks about a lot of soft science in his book on being lonely and the negative impact on health. But there's a lot of very hard science in that space too. So I agree. I think we sound like we're beating up on blue zones as a concept, and I think you're bringing up a good point. It's just what are their use? Hard science, maybe a 1 or a 2, but the ability to deliver culturally acceptable, culturally positive statements about the habits that create a good longevity, a good health span. I think I would give them an 8 out of 10.
Well, the book is like that. The book is full of stories.
Yeah,
it's very
great
engaging.
storyteller.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Now,
I think this is really interesting, and I think about this all the time because our job, I think the three of us, our job is to communicate science to a general audience. And the difficulty is exactly this, that the types of data that are the least compelling scientifically are the most captivating for the public. And so this is a huge barrier. And I mean, I don't know the perfect answer to that. I try to little by little introduce these concepts, but clearly when content is feelings based or story based, I mean, it spreads like wildfire. There's no competing with that with evidence-based content. So I think there's a lot for us to learn here.
Well, you can have millions of cases, but you need to put a face on one of those and create a story out of it. And that's what happens. And that brings me to the next point. Oh, Dr. Brewer, do you remember the thing that you wanted to say, or was...
You're taking a chance on me there, aren't you?
Well, I don't know. Is that what you wanted to say, or is it a different thing?
No, that's not what I wanted to say. It's actually, I wanted to react to Gil's comment about diet today and this week versus body fat. And, we're in the low carb community, sort of. Anyway, we consider ourselves in the low carb community. So, some other members of the low carb community don't. And here's one of the reasons why. I've been pretty clear myself, and I think this is something, hey, Dr. JV, that you and I agree on. Correct me if I'm not. That we see the same thing. We see it with our patients, and there's plenty of evidence out there too. And one of the more compelling stories is Penn Jillette. He lost over 100 pounds eating potatoes. white potatoes. And most people would say, well, most low carbers for sure would say, that's not a good diet. Nothing but potatoes. That's nothing but carbs, glycemic carbs. And he greatly improved his health. And I would agree. No matter what a lot of low carbers say, and no matter what we have in terms of dietary advice, I don't advise a lot of glycemic carbs, especially if you're insulin resistant, which most of us are. I think by far and away, the biggest influence is body fat, not fat in our diet, not carbs in our diet. It's how much body fat we have, creating things like resistin to create more insulin resistance than we already have.
Just to add an interesting other side to that, because in my channel I see that as well. I see people who have been exposed to predominantly low carb content, and they have these beliefs. You can only lose weight if you cut the carbs. If you're eating a diet with a lot of carbs, you're going to get fat. But then I also see people with the same beliefs about fat, about dietary fat. So they believe they believe you only if you cut the fat out of your diet can you lose weight, and the fat you eat is the fat you wear. So I get all the time these two. Sometimes you see the two comments right on top of each other, and I think this. It's because people are exposed to very selective content and very selective stories. But if you hear the stories from both of these diet clubs, they're actually very similar. And people who have these anecdotes are incredibly similar. You just change the name of the diet, but the story itself is very similar. So I don't see any contradiction between these stories and what we know scientifically. I think, as you were saying, there are many ways to lose weight, and losing weight, not all of them are healthy. I think we can agree on that. But there are many ways to lose weight. And every one of these diets has caveats too. None of these diets are caveat free. All of them have concerns, specific concerns, and things that you want to watch out for. So I'm happy to see people achieve their results on whatever macronutrient composition they prefer.
So Jesus, since I've steered us back to where you steered us before on this diet debate, can I ask another question?
You're gonna do that anyway, don't you?
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to satisfy myself that I was being polite, but I wasn't going to be anyway. So, Gil, tell us about your thoughts, your reactions to the carnivore diet.
Most people that are on my channel or that send me messages that are eating these diets are in one of two kind of categories. One is they were struggling with weight, as we were talking about. They were overweight for many years, and they struggled to lose the weight with the usual constellation of problems that comes with the weight, the prediabetes or the diabetes and the inflammatory markers and the triglycerides, all those things. The other category are people who have specific intolerances, certain allergies or certain intolerances to one food or to a group of foods. This in my experience, when people approach me with questions, they're in one of these categories. And so it doesn't surprise me that eating nothing but meat all day gets these results. Not in everyone, because I also get plenty of anecdotes of people who went on these diets and had all kinds of horror stories. But that some people get these results doesn't surprise me, because we see this with all radical elimination diets. We see this with the people who go on raw vegan. We see this with people who go on macrobiotic diets. We see this with people who go on fruitarian diets. They lose weight, and if they have intolerances, very often they experience symptomatic improvement, because if you eliminate 99% of your foods, chances are you're going to eliminate the food you're intolerant to. So those results I find unsurprising, really predictable, and make sense. I think there are obvious concerns with eating nothing but meat all day for a long period of time. Lipids, cardiovascular disease, gut health, lack of fiber. These are some of the concerns I would have with somebody eating a diet like that long term, if it's a choice. So I realize some people don't have the choice and are kind of backed into eating that, and I respect and have compassion for that. But to the extent that it's a choice for some people, those would be some of my concerns.
And Dr. Brewer and I are a little bit more omnivore, which it's part of what, also, if you look at the blue zone, the blue zones have they have used the brand for multiple purposes, and they even had some food guidelines, right? Like, this is what these people eat, this is what you should eat. So
Right.
some of that might make sense. They're heavy on a plant-based diet, but they also acknowledge that a lot of these people are closer to nature. So they even have the chance to grow their own food or get the food directly from their own animals. So they mention eggs, free-range chicken meat. They mention even some red meat, especially from pork, and even some dairy. But it's something that is close to nature to them. It's not that ultra processed, and we have made videos about that also. And I don't know. To me personally, it's hard to make a case in favor of processed meat. It's more easy for me to make a case on unprocessed meat, or something that you can get closer to you more. I don't want to say organic, but some place like the farm is near you and you know where the meat comes from. And even then, happens the same with vegetables and meat. There's a bunch of process on to keeping that meat and vegetables safe to eat, with the pesticides and antibiotics and hormones and all that stuff. It's hard to track, and you come to the point of you need to believe or trust whoever is selling you that product. If you really want to do that yourself, you have to have your own farm, grow your own vegetables, take care of your own soil and water. And not everybody can do that. Most of us, I don't know, I guess you live in a city, don't you?
I do, yeah.
I live in a city, and where are you going to get that? Are you going to travel 1 hour, 2 hours every day to your local farm to get the most fresh product? Not everybody can do that. Dr. Brewer? I was just making up some time for you to think about what you want to share.
Oh no! When we get back to it, I had a comment about the storytelling piece.
I don't know if we're ever gonna go back there, because I wanted to talk about alcohol now.
Well, then let me go ahead and make my comment about storytelling. By definition, guys, neither our channel nor yours, Gil, has 15 to 20 million subscribers, or certainly not 500 million. I think all of us could improve our storytelling techniques and skills. And that's one of the things, actually, that Jesus and I, or Dr. JV, excuse me, the content creator formerly known as Jesus, that he and I are working on. One of the things we're finding is that, you know what, if people don't click, they never see anything. You may say content is king, but if you don't get the click through, there's nothing to be, there's nothing there. So
now you're making excuses for your clickbait, Dr. Brewer.
Well, I mean, you and I talked about it. We're not going to focus on clickbait. Maybe you are a little bit, but I'm not. And basically what we're trying to do is figure out how to tell the story in a way that people are interested.
Yeah.
And that's not easy at all.
I agree. I think about this a lot. How do you present something that is of use to people in a format that they can digest, pun intended, that is not a nightmare, it feels like a chore.
That's terrible fun.
Yeah. But at the same time, where you're not just butchering the science so much that you lose, like there's nothing there anymore, or you're twisting the science upside down and you're hurting people instead of helping. So finding that sweet spot, I think, is the $1 million question, and I certainly have not, but I think about that a lot.
So, Jesus, one other comment before you take it wherever you were going. I noticed that Gil made a comment about eating meat all day, every day. And as we've gotten a little bit deeper into that community, actually, I ate carnivore for about 2 months as an experiment. And Jesus keeps going back and forth. I think he's more of a carnivore than I am. When we meet on travel places, he's the one always wanting more steak and meat, especially if I'm paying for it.
That's the best one.
So there are some different definitions of the term carnivore diet. Some people would say exactly what you're saying. Other people would say, oh no, if you're eating only muscle meat and that all day, every day, that's a lion diet. Some people would say carnivore diet can even have, like, what is his name? Is it Saladino? Used to define his diet, including fruits and honeys, but also organ meats, as a carnivore diet. What I tend to see is the most popular term for a carnivore diet does actually include vegetables, but again, very low carb vegetables. So it's basically only plant products, and which are going to be by definition low carb. I mean, not plant products, animal products, which by definition are going to be low carb, and some very, very low glycemic vegetables like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, things like that.
So you do have an opinion on that?
I do. Actually, I think there's a reason that it's become so dang popular. It's very, very easy, and people are very effectively losing weight.
Yep.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's the whole conversation, and the whole point is it depends. And for some people it might work, for other people it might not. We did a show on carnivore diet, and it's the exact same perspective on Dr. Gil on the side of there's no long-term data, so we don't know. We would love to know what are the effects of a really long-term carnivore diet, but there's not enough sample and not enough research done on that aspect to really know. Now, if you look at the Blue Zone diet, a lot of these people share that they drink wine almost on a daily basis. What are your thoughts on that? Because we are almost like a no alcohol, not even a drop, right? So is that the right thing, or what should we get out of that information?
Basically, on the data that I've seen with alcohol, and this has changed over the last decade or two, the idea that a little bit of alcohol is better than none, I think, has been essentially debunked, certainly for cardiovascular disease and cancer, at least. So the idea currently now, and supported by evidence, is that drinking as close as possible to no alcohol is best. It's basically a straight line. Of course, if you drink a little bit or sporadic, the effect is going to be very small. That's always the case. But the line seems to be pretty much straight. So with the mention in the blue zones, I was a little bit critical of that in my video, because I think Dan Buettner pointed to, I think it was in the Greek island in Icaria. He said they drink a lot of wine, or to drink some wine, so I drink a glass of wine every night, something like that. I don't want to misquote him, but it's something to that.
5 p.m. They even gave the hour. It should be at 5 p.m.
Yeah. So I think this is a perfect example of the misuse of ecological data. I think it's great for broad strokes and for clues, but when we start overstating, oh, here's something that they do, we have to do exactly the same thing to ensure longevity. I think that's where it's a trap.
To quote a Star Wars character, right? I'm going to put that on the edits. It's a trap. If you're a Star Wars fan, you will understand it.
I confess that I did not recognize the quote.
It's a trap.
All right. So, Dr. Burr, any comments on alcohol?
Nothing that would contribute further.
Well,
I will add this. Actually, now that I said that, I will add something. Something similar happened in outside the dietary space, in the atrial fib space for alcohol. We used to think that alcohol did not impact atrial fibrillation. About a year and a half ago, we found that, maybe 2 or 3 years now, we found that it does increase risk for continued atrial fib and staying in that rut of that aberrant conduction.
Yeah. I used to be more permissive with alcohol, tequila and stuff, but yeah. I changed my mind on it.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So what's the bottom line then? It took us 45 minutes to say our blue zones all just a scam and a myth to make profit and as some people say, commit tax fraud and I don't know what else. And some people are there's two people, Saul Newman and I don't wanna pronounce the name incorrectly, Harriet Hall, both of them who have put some important information on how to discredit the blue zone, but it has to do a lot with the data, like fake birth certificates and all that stuff. But I don't think it's worth that kind of thing drives us away from the benefit we can get from the information regarding blue zones. So I'd like to hear your take on what's the bottom line, how to use the blue zones information to actually really do something that helps the longevity.
Yeah, I'll summarize it in 10 seconds if I can. This is always tricky. Most of the information from the blue zones, most of these broad strokes that they talk about are good choices, are good health choices. Not because of the blue zones necessarily. They're not the strongest evidence. We have plenty of other evidence backing those up. Are they going to guarantee that you make it to 100? No, but they are going to help you in general, optimize your health. If the blue zone story helps inspire you to do these things, phenomenal, use it. If not, no need.
Really good. Dr. Brewer?
I'm trying to boil it down to two statements. The
It
first
depends.
What's that?
It depends.
It depends.
End
No,
of the
it
show.
doesn't depend. Better stories than science. But if you may be thinking the wrong way, stories are really more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just say, if you go to the website and look at the Blue Zones diet under guidelines that they're putting out there, which I don't think, as Gil said, I don't think that's necessarily a recipe for longevity. Look at every one of those and see if you have tried every one of those and see if each and every one of those can help you. It's not like, I don't think in diet and longevity there is a one size fits all solution to anybody. I'm going to be the it depends guy now. The Dr. Brewer doesn't want to be. It depends on your own situation and where you live.
Terrible. It's a good
Yeah.
thing we got me up in front instead of you, because that's a terrible kind of wishy-washy. Nobody's going to go for that.
Can't you imagine what a lack of compromise not to say that you should be carnivore or vegan? Oh, man. All right. So anything else to add?
Oh, I think we hit all the key points.
All right. So, Dr. Brewer, want to close the show?
Don't let Tony the Tiger take over your dinner.
All right. See you next week.